When you pull away, she begins to wonder what happened to the version of you that once chased her so eagerly. She starts replaying moments, scrolling through memories, and questioning why your energy feels so distant now. That's when the shift begins because silence speaks louder than words. And the man who learns to be still in his power becomes the one she can't stop thinking about. This is not about manipulation or games. It's about rediscovering your value so profoundly that your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. Let's talk about how to make her chase you after no contact. The power of absence is one of the most underestimated forces in human connection. When you pull back your energy, something deep and psychological begins to happen. People don't realize how much emotional weight, constant presence carries until it's gone. When you stop reaching out, stop seeking validation, and stop trying to prove your worth, you create a void that cannot be ignored. That void becomes your power. It is not about punishment or ego. It's about rebalancing the scales of emotional energy. When you've been the one giving endlessly, showing up every time, being too available, you've unknowingly given away your mystery, your value, your edge. But when you step back and let silence do the talking, she begins to notice what your presence used to bring. The laughter, the emotional support, the comfort, the attention, it all comes back to her in flashes. And that's when absence becomes louder than words ever could. There's something about distance that forces people to reflect. When you're constantly present, you become predictable, almost taken for granted, because the mind grows accustomed to what it always has. But when you withdraw that presence, it creates contrast, a silence that amplifies everything she once ignored. She begins to question why she doesn't hear Fro. Mew anymore, why your energy feels different and why the attention she was so used to has suddenly disappeared. That curiosity becomes her silent teacher. It makes her realize that your presence was never ordinary. It carried peace. It carried stability. It carried an emotional depth that she now misses in your absence. The human mind doesn't appreciate consistency until it experiences loss. And when your silence enters the picture, it becomes a mirror that forces her to confront her own emotions and choices. Absence also redefines value. The more available you are, the more your energy becomes common. But when you remove it, it suddenly becomes rare. Rarity has power. It draws attention, respect, and admiration. That's why silence works. It reminds the other person of your worth without you ever needing to speak. You start shifting from being the one who seeks to the one who is sought. And that transformation is subtle yet profound. She begins to wonder where you went, whether you've changed or if you've moved on. And with every unanswered question, her mind grows more invested. You're no longer the man she once had access to any time she wanted. You're now the man she has to figure out, the one whose absence creates emotional tension she can't quite shake off. But the real power of absence doesn't just lie in what it does to her, it lies in what it does to you. When you step back, you regain perspective. You stop chasing emotions and start observing them. You realize how much energy you were giving without return and how much of your identity had become tied to her attention. That realization is liberating. You start focusing inward, rebuilding your sense of self-worth, redirecting your focus toward your goals, your peace, your purpose. The silence that once felt heavy begins to feel empowering because it's no longer about her. It's about you. You start embodying calmness, confidence, and control. And ironically, that's exactly when she begins to feel your absence the most. Because absence doesn't mean you disappeared, it means you reclaimed yourself. And that energy cannot go unnoticed. An emotional reset is the moment when you stop reacting from pain and start responding from power. It's the quiet turning point where you decide to no longer let emotions control your behavior, where you stop chasing closure, and where you allow silence to rebuild your emotional equilibrium. During no contact, this reset becomes your most valuable opportunity, not to win someone back, but to win yourself back. When a relationship or connection consumes your thoughts, it's easy to lose yourself in the noise of constant overthinking, replaying conversations, and analyzing what went wrong. You start believing that your worth depends on their validation, that if they came back, everything would finally make sense again. But emotional resetting means breaking that illusion. It's when you stop looking for peace in another person and start finding it within yourself. It's about clearing the emotional residue that made you reactive, anxious, and dependent, and learning to function from stillness instead of fear. The emotional reset begins when you allow yourself to detach, not just physically, but mentally and spiritually. You start observing your emotions instead of being consumed by them. Every time you resist the urge to text, every time you choose not to check their social media, you're not just ignoring them, you're retraining your nervous system to exist without their presence. You're teaching yourself that you can survive discomfort, that you can feel longing without acting on it, that you can feel pain without letting it dictate your decisions. This is emotional discipline. And it's rare because most people want relief, not growth. But real strength is built when you sit with what hurts and allow it to lose power over you. When you stop seeking distraction or temporary comfort, you begin to feel emotions as they are, raw and unfiltered. And in that process, you discover a version of yourself that no longer reacts from old wounds, but responds from awareness. Emotional reset also means reclaiming the energy you once scattered. When you were constantly giving your attention to someone else, your emotional energy became fragmented. You poured so much into another person that you forgot to nurture your own inner world. But when you pull that energy back, you begin to rebuild your emotional center. You start to feel grounded again, more focused, more intentional. You realize how much peace exists in solitude, how empowering it feels to be in control of your own emotions rather than being driven by them. It's not that you stop caring, it's that you start caring differently. You care from a place of self-respect instead of self-sacrifice, from clarity instead of confusion. You stop needing constant reassurance because you've created a stable foundation within yourself that no one else can shake. And the most powerful part of an emotional reset is what it communicates without words. When she senses that your energy has shifted, that you're no longer emotionally attached, no longer seeking validation, no longer affected by her absence, she begins to feel it deeply because energy doesn't lie. When your emotions are balanced, your presence becomes calm, confident, and magnetic. You're no longer operating from insecurity. You're radiating self-assurance. That's when she starts to wonder what changed. When she starts feeling your emotional independence as something new and unfamiliar, you've become centered. And that stability creates attraction in its purest form, because emotional control is the highest form of power. And when you master it, everything around you begins to realign. Self-transformation is the unseen evolution that happens in silence when no one is watching. It's not about changing to impress someone or to prove a point. It's about becoming the version of yourself that you were always meant to be but never gave time to develop. When you go through no contact, you are handed a mirror, one that reflects not who you were in the relationship, but who you became because of it. You begin to notice how much of yourself was shaped by the need to be loved, accepted, or chosen. You start seeing how often you sacrificed your peace to maintain connection, how many times you betrayed your own boundaries just to be understood, and that realization becomes the seed of transformation, because true change doesn't come from resentment, it comes from awareness. You begin to understand that the person you were before no contact was driven by emotion, but the person you are becoming is driven by intention. This period of solitude forces you to sit with your insecurities, your patterns, your emotional triggers, and face them with honesty instead of avoidance. It's a time when you stop asking, why did they change, and start asking, what can I change within myself? The process of self-transformation is not linear. It's uncomfortable, unpredictable, and deeply internal. You begin to strip away the parts of yourself that were performative. The constant availability, the emotional dependency, the fear of abandonment, and you start reconnecting with your authenticity. You realize that your worth never depended on who stayed or who left. It depended on how much you respected yourself in the process. You start prioritizing growth over attention, solitude over validation, and purpose over approval. The man or woman who emerges from this stage carries a completely different energy, one that is calm yet commanding. You don't chase anymore because you finally understand that what is meant for you will align naturally. When you are in alignment with yourself, you begin to cultivate habits that strengthen you physically, mentally, and emotionally. You start reading, reflecting, setting goals, building discipline, and maintaining a lifestyle that feeds your confidence rather than your ego. Slowly, your silence becomes your sanctuary and your growth becomes your message. You're no longer trying to prove your worth through words. You're living it through actions. What makes self-transformation so powerful is that it shifts the way you carry your energy. Before, your presence might have been tied to emotional need, but now it's rooted in self-assurance. You move differently, think differently, speak differently, and that shift is felt before it's seen. People begin to notice something new about you, a stillness that replaces your old anxiety, a confidence that doesn't need validation, a depth that can't be faked. Even she begins to sense it because energy doesn't lie. The same absence that once created distance now becomes magnetic, not because you're trying to attract her back, but because you've elevated your vibration to a place she can no longer ignore. Self-transformation doesn't demand attention. It commands it. It's the silent evolution that turns pain into purpose, confusion into clarity, and loss into strength. Through this transformation, you stop living as a reaction to someone else's choices and start living as a reflection of your own growth. Energy reversal is the silent turning point in every connection where the dynamic shifts without a single word being spoken. It happens when you stop pouring all your emotional energy outward and begin redirecting it inward. When you were constantly reaching out, checking your phone, replaying scenarios in your head, your energy was leaking everywhere. You were trying to maintain a connection that was draining you, hoping that if you just showed how much you cared, things would go back to the way they used to be. But emotional energy is powerful, and when it is misdirected, it creates imbalance. The moment you stop chasing, stop reacting, stop investing where your presence isn't appreciated, that same energy begins to flow back toward you. It is no longer scattered, it becomes centered. That is the essence of energy reversal. When you take everything you are giving away and use it to rebuild your focus, your confidence, and your inner strength. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It begins quietly with a single decision to no longer seek validation outside of yourself. And from that point onward, everything about your presence begins to change. When your energy reverses, your silence starts to speak volumes. You are no longer the one trying to prove your worth. Instead, your stillness becomes magnetic. The absence of effort creates tension, not because you are playing games, but because you are no longer available in the same way. She begins to feel the shift. Even without communication, the energy she once took for granted now feels distant. And that distance creates curiosity. It's not about ignoring her. It's about no longer feeding her ego with constant reassurance. Your detachment becomes powerful because it is rooted in peace, not resentment. You have stopped reacting to her actions, and that Unpredictability begins to unsettle her. Energy has a frequency, and when yours elevates, people who were once comfortable around you start to feel the change. She starts wondering what caused it, why you seem unaffected, and whether she still has the same emotional pull over you. This is where the balance of power shifts, not because you forced it, but because you reclaimed control of your emotional direction. The beauty of energy reversal is that it doesn't just affect how others perceive you, it transforms how you perceive yourself. You begin to realize how much strength lies in stillness. You're not drained anymore because your focus is no longer external. It's gain. Your presence feels grounded. Your words carry weight. And your silence demands attention. The world responds differently to someone who is no longer seeking, because that kind of energy feels complete within itself. And it's precisely this completion that becomes attractive. When you stop chasing, you start drawing things toward you. When you stop needing validation, you start commanding respect. Energy reversal is not about winning someone back. It's about returning home to yourself. It's the moment you stop being the pursuer and start being the prize, not through arrogance, but through alignment. Because when your energy returns to you, everything that truly belongs to you begins to follow. Mystery and distance are two of the most powerful psychological forces in attraction because they awaken curiosity and emotional tension in ways words never can. When you become too predictable, too available, or too transparent with your emotions, you remove the intrigue that fuels desire. Human nature is drawn to the unknown. It's wired to chase what feels slightly out of reach. When you pull back your energy and create distance, not as a tactic, but as a natural extension of self-respect, you allow space for curiosity to grow. She begins to wonder where your attention went, why your tone has changed, why your energy feels detached. It's not that you're hiding, it's that you're no longer giving away every piece of yourself so easily. And that subtle mystery, those unanswered questions, begin to stir her emotions more than any words or actions ever could. People value what they can't fully understand because the mind becomes obsessed with filling in the blanks. When you stop explaining yourself, stop over communicating, stop proving your feelings, you create an energetic gap that pulls her attention toward you without even trying. Distance, on the other hand, is the amplifier of that mystery. When you step back physically or emotionally, you give her the space to miss you, to reflect, to feel the contrast between your presence and your absence. Most people fear distance because they think it will make the other person forget them. But real distance, when grounded in strength, does the opposite. It intensifies presence. She starts replaying old moments, revisiting conversations, and analyzing your behavior, trying to make sense of why you no longer respond the way you used to. The silence becomes louder with each passing day, and her curiosity slowly turns into emotional pursuit. This is not manipulation, it's alignment. Because the more you detach from the need to be seen, the more powerful your presence becomes. She begins to sense that you are no longer orbiting around her, that your world has expanded beyond her attention, that awareness triggers something primal within her, the fear of losing emotional influence. And it's that very fear that reignites attraction. Mystery and distance also protect your energy. When you stop revealing every thought and emotion, you preserve your power. The less she knows about your inner world, the more she wants to uncover. The less she hears from you, the more she wants to feel connected again. You become a puzzle, not because you're playing games, but because you're no longer emotionally predictable. Predictability breeds comfort, but mystery breeds fascination. when she can't quite read you, when your silence feels intentional, when your energy feels grounded yet unavailable, she begins to perceive you differently. You shift from being emotionally accessible to emotionally intriguing. Your value increases not because you changed who you are, but because you stopped trying to prove it. She begins to chase not just your attention, but the feeling she used to get when she had it. And that's when the power dynamic transforms. Mystery and distance create the psychological contrast that keeps her emotionally engaged, allowing her to experience the depth of your absence and the weight of your presence at the same time. Re-entry with power is not about returning to prove something. It's about walking back into her world as the embodiment of the transformation you've undergone in silence. When you reappear after no contact, the goal is not to make a statement with words, but with presence. Most people rush this stage. They reach out too soon, still carrying the same emotional neediness that caused the disconnect in the first place. But real power lies in restraint, in timing, and in the energy you carry when you finally return. The version of you that left was reactive, emotionally charged, maybe even uncertain of your own worth. But the version that re-enters must be calm, composed, and centered. You don't chase. You don't explain. You don't remind her of what she lost. You simply allow her to feel it. Your growth speaks through your tone, your confidence, and your new emotional balance. When she looks at you, she should sense the shift immediately, not because you're trying to show off, but because your energy naturally communicates that you no longer need validation from her to feel whole. When you re-enter with power, your presence triggers reflection. She begins to notice the difference between the old you and the new you. Your words carry more intention, your boundaries feel firmer, and your energy radiates self-assurance. You're no longer emotionally reactive to her behavior, and that calmness becomes your quiet authority. She may test you subtly, trying to see if you'll fall back into the same patterns, but the difference now is that you don't play that emotional game anymore. You've reached a state where peace is more valuable than proving a point. The man who once waited for her response now walks with the confidence that he is the response. That reversal of energy makes her feel uncertain, not because you're distant, but because she can no longer predict you. And unpredictability, when grounded in self-respect, reignites attraction faster than anything else. She starts to wonder what changed, what happened during your silence, and how you've managed to become so composed after what felt like emotional chaos. Re-entry with power also means you no longer seek to continue the same story. You're writing a new one. You no longer return from a place of lack, but from a place of abundance. You're not trying to win her back. You're simply being your authentic self and allowing her to decide if she can meet you at that level. This shift removes all pressure from your interaction because you're not attached to the outcome anymore. You understand that if she recognizes your growth, she will naturally be drawn to it. And if she doesn't, you've already outgrown the need for her recognition. The confidence you carry now is quiet, almost unspoken, but undeniable. It's the confidence of someone who has faced his emotions, healed from them, and come out stronger. You're not seeking connection for validation. You're open to connection from strength. That's what true re-entry looks like. When your silence has matured into presence, your detachment has transformed into discipline, and your energy commands attention without demanding it. Because re-entry with power is not about proving you've changed. It's about being so grounded in your evolution that your very presence becomes the proof. The journey of no contact is not just a strategy. It's a spiritual reset, a transformation of energy, mindset, and identity. It's where you move from chasing to attracting, from needing to becoming. Through the power of absence, you learn that silence is not weakness but strength. It forces her to feel your value in the void you leave behind. Through emotional reset, you reclaim control over your feelings, no longer reacting from pain, but responding from awareness. Through self transformation, you rise from the chaos of loss and evolve into someone whose peace cannot be disturbed. Through energy reversal, you redirect every ounce of what you once gave away and use it to build the foundation of your new confidence. Through mystery and distance, you create an aura that demands respect and curiosity instead of attention and validation. And through re entry with power, you show that growth isn't something you announce, it's something you radiate. This entire process is not about winning someone back, it's about winning yourself back. When you master detachment, you stop living in emotional survival mode and start operating from alignment. You no longer beg for love because you've become love in its purest form, calm, grounded, and secure. You begin to realize that the person who walks away from you teaches you more about yourself than the one who stays, and that every silence is an invitation to grow louder within. You stop chasing connection because you've learned that the deepest connections are drawn to peace, not pressure. You embody stillness, you embody strength, and you embody the unspoken truth that real attraction is never forced. It flows naturally toward those who have mastered their energy. So when she begins to feel your absence, when she wonders why her pull no longer works, when she starts chasing what she once ignored, understand that this is not about revenge or validation. It's about reflection. You have evolved. You are no longer the same person who entered no contact with fear. You are the one who emerged from it with power. You've learnt to let go, not with bitterness, but with awareness. And that awareness changes everything, because the moment you stop needing anyone to see your worth is the moment the world starts to see it for you. That is the silent magic of transformation, the energy that makes her chase you again, not because you demanded it, but because your evolution made her realize that losing you was never her choice. It was her consequence.